The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, as Jen walked briskly along the dusty road back to her village. Her woven basket, heavy with fresh vegetables and cloth from the market, swayed rhythmically on her head. The journey home was familiar and peaceful, the surrounding forest alive with the sound of chirping cicadas. As she approached the midway point of her route, the unexpected sound of an engine rumbled behind her. Startled, Jen turned to see a sleek black car pulling up alongside her. Cars were a rare sight in her rural village, reserved for wealthy traders, government officials, or strangers passing through. The window rolled down, revealing a man with sharp features, neatly combed hair, and a charismatic smile. His presence was striking yet intimidating. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth yet commanding. "I'm looking for Umaro Village. Could you give me directions?" Jen hesitated, gripping her basket tightly. "It's about 2 miles from here," she said cautiously. "Go straight until you reach the big baobab tree, then take a left." The man nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. Are you heading far? It's getting late. I could give you a ride if you'd like." Jen's first instinct was to decline, but the road ahead seemed longer with every step, and the weight of her basket pressed into her neck and shoulders. Against her better judgment, she relented. "All right," she said, climbing into the car. The man introduced himself as Kalu, a trader visiting the region for business. As they drove, he spoke about his travels, weaving tales of distant towns and bustling markets. Jen, though wary, found herself intrigued by his confidence and the life he described, a life far removed from her quiet village. When they reached the fork in the road, Jen directed him to stop. "This is where I get off," she said, stepping out with her basket. Kalu watched her for a moment, his gaze lingering. "Take care, Jen," he said before driving away. Back at home, her mother, Mama Adaku, was waiting on the porch. She noticed the car disappearing down the road and frowned. "Who was that?" she asked sharply. "A trader," Jen replied, setting down her basket. "He asked for directions and gave me a ride." Mama Adaku's expression darkened. "You shouldn't take rides from strangers, Jen. The world is not as kind as it seems. Now go and bathe. You've been out all day, and who knows what kind of spirits you've brought back with you." Jen sighed, brushing off her mother's concern, but as she prepared for bed that night, she couldn't shake the memory of Kalu's lingering gaze. The following day, as Jen walked to the river to fetch water, she noticed the sleek black car parked near the edge of the forest. Her heart raced as Kalu stepped out, smiling in a way that unsettled her. "I was hoping I'd see you again," he said. Jen froze as Kalu stepped out of the car, his sharp features illuminated by the fading light of the setting sun. His smile was warm, but there was something about his presence that made her uneasy. The sleek black car seemed out of place, parked at the edge of the forest path near her village. "What are you doing here?" Jen asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She shifted her basket to her other arm, suddenly aware of the emptiness of the road around them. Kalu took a few steps toward her, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel. "I was passing through," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with casual charm. "I remembered your village was nearby and thought I might see you again. It's rare to meet someone as interesting as you." Jen frowned, her wariness growing. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "I'm busy, and I need to get home." But Kalu wasn't deterred. "Relax," he said, his smile unwavering. "I didn't mean to startle you. I just wanted to talk. You seem like someone worth knowing." His words made her stomach churn. She tightened her grip on the basket, the weight of the vegetables suddenly feeling heavier. "I don't have time for this," she muttered, turning to leave. Before she could take another step, she felt his hand close around her wrist. The pressure was firm but not painful, yet it was enough to send a jolt of fear through her body. "Don't be so quick to walk away," Kalu said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. Jen yanked her arm free, her heart pounding. "Let me go," she snapped, her voice trembling. Kalu raised his hands in mock surrender, but the glint in his eyes was far from apologetic. "I didn't mean to upset you," he said, taking a step back. "I just thought we could talk, that's all." Jen's instincts screamed at her to leave, to run back to the safety of her village, but her pride wouldn't let her show fear. She turned and began walking briskly down the path, her pulse racing. Behind her, Kalu stood watching her retreating figure. His smile faded, replaced by an expression that sent a chill down her spine when she dared glance over her shoulder. The forest path was quieter than usual that evening. The chirping of crickets and rustling leaves seemed muted, as though the very air held its breath. Jen quickened her pace, her bare feet kicking up small puffs of dust as she tried to put as much distance as possible between herself and the car. But the sound of footsteps following her made her heart drop. She didn't need to look back to know it was Kalu. "Jen?" he called out, his voice calm but commanding. "Why are you in such a hurry? I just want to talk." Jen didn't respond. She kept her head down and her steps steady, praying that he would give up and leave her alone. But the footsteps grew louder, faster, until they were right behind her. "Stop!" Kalu barked, grabbing her arm and yanking her to a halt. Jen screamed, dropping her basket as she tried to free herself. "Let me go!" she cried, her voice echoing through the empty forest. But Kalu's grip was unyielding, his face twisted with frustration as he pulled her closer. "Why are you making this so difficult?" he snapped. Panic surged through Jen as she struggled against him, her nails digging into his arms, her legs kicking wildly. But Kalu was stronger, his movements calculated and forceful. He dragged her deeper into the forest, away from the road and any chance of help. The trees loomed around them, their branches casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. Jen's screams grew fainter as her voice gave out, her energy fading under Kalu's relentless strength. When they stopped, he shoved her to the ground. Jen's knees scraped against the rough earth, tears streaming down her face as she tried to crawl away. But Kalu was on her in an instant, his hands pinning her down. "Please," she whimpered, her voice barely audible. "Don't do this." Her pleas fell on deaf ears. The man who had once smiled at her with charm and warmth was gone, replaced by someone cold and unrecognizable. When it was over, Jen lay motionless on the forest floor, her body aching and her mind numb. Kalu stood above her, his expression unreadable. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Jen didn't know how long she stayed there, staring blankly at the canopy of leaves above her. The world around her felt distant, muffled, as though she were trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Eventually, she forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. She stumbled toward the road, her torn clothes clinging to her sweat-soaked skin. The walk back to the village felt endless, each step heavier than the last. When she finally reached her home, her mother, Mama Adaku, was sitting on the porch weaving a mat. She looked up and gasped, dropping her work as she rushed to her daughter's side. "Jen, what happened?" Mama Adaku cried, her hands hovering over her daughter's bruised arms and tear-streaked face. Jen collapsed into her mother's embrace, her body shaking with silent sobs. She couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. Her voice was gone, swallowed by the forest. Mama Adaku held her tightly, rocking her gently as tears streamed down her own face. "Who did this to you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. But Jen didn't answer. She couldn't. The following morning, the village was in uproar. When Mama Daku shared what had happened, the elders convened an emergency meeting. The men of the village, outraged by the violation of one of their own, vowed to hunt down the man responsible. But Jen surprised them all when she stood up in the middle of the gathering. Her voice was hoarse but steady as she said, "No, I will handle this myself." Her words sent a ripple of shock through the crowd. Mama Adaku grabbed her daughter's arm, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Jen, you can't—" "I have to," Jen interrupted, her gaze fierce despite the tears welling in her eyes. "I need to face him." That evening, as the village settled into uneasy silence, Jen packed a small bag and set off toward the forest path. The shadows stretched long across the ground, and the faint sound of cicadas filled the air. She didn't know what she would find, or if she would even return.
When Jen arrived at Kalu's village, it felt like the entire settlement had turned to stone. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Children paused their play, and villagers stared as the young woman marched through the dusty streets with a determined look in her eyes. A confrontation like this was unheard of. Kalu was a man of stature and power, known for his influence and his ability to intimidate. To see a lone woman stand before his household caused a ripple of murmurs among the onlookers. Jen's heart hammered in her chest, but her resolve held steady. She hadn't traveled this far, carrying the weight of her pain and questions, to falter now. Kalu emerged from his house, his face a mask of indifference. His sharp features were illuminated by the golden light of the late afternoon, and for a moment, Jen felt the same chill she had felt the day they met. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of the charm he had once used to lure her into his car. The villagers watched in silence, their curiosity piqued. Kalu was rarely confronted, let alone by a woman whose defiance seemed to slice through the tension in the air. Jen took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "You know what you did to me," she said, the words cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You broke me, but I want to know why. What made you into this monster?" Her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unrelenting. Kalu's expression flickered, his calm demeanor cracking for just a moment. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, then gestured for Jen to follow him. The confrontation. Inside his home, the air was thick with tension. Kalu sat across from Jen, his gaze avoiding hers as she waited for him to speak. Finally, he exhaled heavily and began, his voice quieter now. "You want to know why? Fine. I'll tell you." He spoke of his past, a childhood filled with violence and loss. His father had been an abusive man, and his mother had disappeared when he was young. Left to fend for himself, Kalu had grown up on the streets, where survival meant suppressing his humanity. "I don't say this to excuse what I did," he added, his voice rough with emotion. "But I became what the world made me. I let bitterness and anger consume me, and I've hurt people because of it." Jen listened, her anger simmering beneath the surface. She had expected excuses or denial, but his honesty caught her off guard. While she didn't forgive him, she saw the brokenness in him, the pain that had shaped him into the man he had become. "That's not good enough," she said, her voice firm. "You don't get to blame your past for what you've done. If you truly want redemption, then you must earn it. You must dedicate yourself to making amends, not just to me, but to everyone you've wronged." The transformation begins. The villagers were skeptical when Kalu began to change. At first, they thought it was an act, a way to pacify Jen and avoid further confrontation. But as days turned into weeks, his efforts became undeniable. Kalu started small, helping repair roofs damaged by the rainy season. He fetched water for elderly villagers, tended to their livestock, and offered his time to teach the younger men skills he had learned over the years. Jen watched from a distance, her emotions a whirlwind. She couldn't reconcile the man she saw now with the one who had caused her so much pain. One day, as she walked through the village, she overheard two women talking about Kalu. "Do you see how hard he's working?" one asked. "It's strange. He's never been like this before." The other woman nodded. "Maybe he's trying to change. But can a man like him truly change?" Jen couldn't answer that question herself. A step toward redemption. Weeks turned into months, and Kalu's dedication never wavered. He organized a team to rebuild the village well, which had been damaged for years. When a group of raiders threatened to attack, Kalu was the first to step forward, putting his life on the line to protect the villagers. Jen found herself drawn into his orbit, her curiosity growing despite her lingering resentment. She started speaking to him, cautiously at first, but gradually their conversations grew longer. One evening, as the sun set over the river, Jen approached Kalu. He was sitting on a rock, skipping stones across the water. "You've changed," she said, breaking the silence. Kalu turned to her, his expression soft. "I had to," he replied. "I can never undo what I did to you, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be better." Jen sat beside him, her thoughts heavy. "I never thought I could feel anything but hatred for you," she admitted. "But now, I'm not sure anymore." Kalu looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and regret. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, "but I'll keep trying, even if you never give it to me." A complicated bond. As time passed, their bond deepened. Jen found herself laughing at his jokes, seeking his company when she felt lonely. But the memories of that night still lingered, a shadow over their growing connection. One day, as they worked side by side in the village fields, Kalu said, "Do you think it's possible for someone to truly start over?" Jen paused, her hands resting on the handle of her hoe. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But maybe it's not about starting over. Maybe it's about moving forward, step by step." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Kalu felt a glimmer of hope.